I've been seeing a lot of discussions pop up everywhere, especially in the atheist community, about the idea that we're in a simulation. Not only that, but I often hear that we're probably in a simulation. Think about those odds for just a second. I don't mind exploring ideas, and in fact that's essentially the idea driving my channel. From a negative perspective, of course. But there seems to be some wishful or even erroneous thinking for the simulation theory, or at least versions of it. In placement of a classical god, we've inserted a new one, a brand new technological god or an intelligent race toying with us for whatever reason. At first, I thought this was just small talk going around by the tech bros, but now it's entertained in every discussion, from the average person to world-renowned scientists. So this topic was, of course, going to end up in my lap at some point. So George Berkeley said, "Few men think, yet all have opinions." And Voltaire said, "Opinion has caused more trouble on this little earth than plagues or earthquakes." And of course everyone has an opinion, but not everyone is well informed. So, of course, I'm going to share my own stupid opinion. But I want you to go listen to how these people purport this concept as being very likely, while inserting assumptions many times over in their reasoning. It's as if to say that you find yourself lost in a desert, and you finally stumble upon an oasis with water, but now you begin to ask yourself questions. You assume that if there's water and vegetation, that there must be small plant-eating mammals, and if there's plant-eating mammals, there must be predators, and if there's predators, there must be even larger predators, and if there's large predators, well, there could be something hunting you nearby, even as you approach the oasis. There's so many false assumptions given no real evidence. Just go drink the water, seriously. The first reason I believe it's unlikely that we're in a simulation is due to the beginning of our universe. Even if the Big Bang wasn't the true beginning of everything, that our universe was tapered off like a turd from a previous reality into our current one, we encounter the obvious physical problems at our doorstep. There are computational problems and the problem of intelligence itself. There's a lot of contingencies for this to work. First, a lot of this stems from the current AI hype, which really are just generic algorithms for machine learning. It's not even close to something we currently call conscious. The quality has barely improved since it began, and it's still entirely reliant on anything we explicitly put in. For example, when generating AI images, you need very specific prompts to get more accurate depictions. With a smaller database to draw upon, you're going to get tighter results. But even here, it will only draw upon what has been fed. It can't reimagine anything specific that we didn't tell it to do. And if this is intelligence, then look no further than the archives of the Library of Babel for images. The site already contains every possible image in a 640 by 416 frame, using 4096 colors. Most of these images are waiting to be unearthed, and most of them never will be. It's impossible. Every image of life, love, suffering, death, and anything imaginable in a picture can be found. But finding truth will be nearly impossible. Finding lies will be probable, and finding meaningless noise will take the majority of the results. That's sort of how these AI systems work, except they don't filter out the bullshit like we do. We can use inductive and deductive reasoning. So this site contains 10 to the power of 961,755 unique images. For scale, there are approximately 10 to the power of 78 to 10 to the power of 82 atoms in the observable universe. So, from our perspective, the permutations here are infinite. Now, let's incorporate all the smells, sounds, frequencies, every possible thing in reality in at least 3 dimensions, not 2. And instead of one frame, we're dealing with nearly infinite frames that follow one another by each moment of Planck time. These permutations are enormously incomprehensible. The number is so large that you might as well give up trying to understand it. But what I didn't mention is that Babel Images doesn't have a hard drive for all the possible images it can generate. That's obviously not how it works. There wouldn't be enough hard drive space in the universe to do that. It generates something random, and the idea is copied for us to use later if we'd like to revisit it. On the other hand, we live as conscious beings with memories, and I don't believe it's likely that whatever is simulating this universe would have the technology to do so. We can simulate things like video games, but it's far inferior to reality as we understand it. We can even simulate thousands of years of history in minutes, but we have to use oversimplified models. We can't perfectly recreate things as they were. And if we can simulate things in our universe perfectly onto another universe, we run into another problem. The information becomes too vast to occupy one space, because every possible universe can create another, and storage, whatever it may be, cannot contain everything. We have an energy density problem. Every universe would require a vastly inferior version of itself with diminishing returns. We would require multiple simulations to create a smaller version within it. And for what purpose? We have our own universe to simulate reality itself. So why all this technology? And while I have lightly entertained that we could be living in multiple universes, I don't see the evidence for this, so I don't take it too seriously. All we have to work with is this one. And if you say that our intelligent creators are working with greater technology, or a greater universe, I think my argument remains the same. Entropy and chaos theory are the axioms here, and whatever they create will be an inferior derivative version, assuming they can even manage it. I even see people giving out mathematical probabilities that we exist in a simulation. How can we even calculate that, given that a completely simulated universe has happened 0 times, and it's virtually identical to the universe we already live in? Also, many assume that if there's one simulation, there must be many other versions, and the odds that we're at the top are unlikely. This is faulty thinking. The odds that we're so far deep into a simulation should become less so as power and computation begins to degrade. Again, we run into limiting processing power and decreasing quality when producing simulations. Even if you allow almost 14 billion years of things to work itself out, that's a hell of a lot of wasted space. They could have sped up that process, or removed a lot of empty space. Although, it is kind of humorous to imagine that something like dark matter could be something like rendering in a video game, and black holes could just be the transfer of information or memory dumps. But even detecting things like gravitons would require a particle accelerator about the size of a solar system. So one has to ask why. And that brings me to my next point. The next reason I don't believe we're in a simulation is the motivation behind it. Although admittedly this is a weaker reason, one must ask why, assuming there's intelligence behind it. Because if you wanted to create a simulation and ignore the motivations behind it, it seems to be a cop-out. We can't even entertain the idea that a superintelligence would have reasons far beyond our understanding to do all this. How does that make sense? It's the same sort of cop-out religious people answer when questioned about why God does the things he does, like unnecessary harm to innocent people. An answer to make you roll your eyes when you hear the absurd and trite response like, God works in mysterious ways. I'm sorry, that just doesn't cut it. I'm here to have a conversation, and if I'm not on their level, or if we aren't, give us the building block concepts to work it out. People worship this idea of hyperintelligence, but more intelligence doesn't directly correlate to arbitrary reasons. It means solving more complex problems quicker, but it still needs to compute what it has from the data it's been given. All of humanity's knowledge has been accumulated by observing not just our world, but the universe around us. Yes, there's so much we don't know, but for example, we also have a very minimal amount of oceans explored. Only about 20% of our own world's oceans is mapped out currently. But we can extrapolate what we have from this and make general predictions, and usually it's pretty accurate. From what we've gathered, we don't assume, for example, that there's animals far bigger than the blue whale, just because we only have 1/5 of the total possible data. We don't rule it out, but it's a biological uncertainty to such a high degree. Furthermore, we don't need billions of fossils to prove evolution. Fossils are actually quite rare, since preservation is so delicate and capricious. We have literal tons of evidence, but the sample size compared to the sum total is minuscule. But even here, evolution is probably the most rigorously studied theory ever. The point is that we can grasp reasoning beyond us and build a better understanding. We seem to be grasping at no valuable reason for such pointless existence, and with no other intelligence to interact with. Why would they do this? Again, the point of all this is to say that it's impossible to imagine why someone would do this, or nearly impossible. We have general concepts to work out. Is it for fun? Is it for science? Is it some kind of punishment? In the end, the why doesn't necessarily exist, and we observe so much waste that even for some hyper-intelligence, this seems unreasonable and pointless. If there is a why and it's beyond our understanding, let's at least discuss the possible reasons, or the building block reasons. Since we can create very primitive versions of our own simulations, we can at least ask ourselves, why conduct such an experiment? But even we might hesitate to create something if we know it would cause serious harm to sentience in that simulation, or at least stop the simulation after its apparent hundreds of millions of years of meaninglessness. At the very least, we could intervene in pointless suffering, or scrap it altogether. If our end goal was to realize that we were in a simulation, wouldn't we have already achieved that goal? The more you ask why, the less reasonable it seems a superintelligence would continue this, unless they were truly ignorant, or objective evil actually existed. Anything capable of creating such a complex simulation is probably not ignorant. Even from a superintelligent point of view, where it cannot comprehend our form of suffering, you would have to ask what value it needs to gather from us. If it mimics some form of their universe, or we do, what could they possibly learn from this simulation? So, if there is a superintelligence behind this, my best assumption would be that it's bored, emotionless, and extremely wasteful. From a motivational standpoint, it seems less plausible than the Christian God almost. Again, it doesn't completely rule out the possibility, but even we humans have reached a point where we must call into question the ethics of creating such things under our influence. I believe consciousness and intelligence most likely work in unison. At least, this is the evidence I'm forced to opine with. And if they don't understand feelings, how could they have created them? How could we have inherited them? Of course, even this belief is biased, since our DNA is all the life we have to work with. I guess we're going to have to find some alien life, but even this, I doubt we'll ever find. Finally, I'd like to mention that we should apply Occam's razor here in every argument, or we should at least consider it. What is the simplest explanation? Well, many of the people espousing these ideas reject the existence of any god, but believe a higher intelligence created us. But now that begs the question, what created them? An omniscient, omnipotent God would require a greater God, by at least an order of magnitude, and our intelligence simulators would be held to a similar standard. We require an origin story at some point, and if the story is infinite, how might we examine the sphere of everything? Small things build bigger things. The big universe is just comprised of our small universe. When I explain my belief in duality, I might have confused some people. I have trouble explaining myself sometimes. So the reason why I believe two parts must necessarily exist, whatever the two parts may be, this explanation was more for a question like, why is there something rather than nothing? Where does nothing come from? My answer is that nothing cannot exist. And I go into more details on that if you like to go back and watch my video. It's on a terrifying prospect, for example. Basically, even defining nothing is giving it a quality, and we've already created an observation and an observer at that point. Did nothing require self-examination? Who knows? But what I do know is that it seems far more unlikely that a very intricate, detailed universe with complicated rules came first from absolutely nothing, and everything else is just derivative. Just ask any kid who's played on Minecraft, and they'll understand that small things build the larger things. But this is more intuition here, and it may be misleading. Still, I don't see how an intelligence is that different than a god with much greater power. Honestly, it's just a modern version. What I believe is that something seems to be happening and I'm assuming other people have that seeming too. We just call that consciousness. As far as we can tell, we can only really play with consciousness if we have a brain, so evolution is an important detail. I don't think everything here is purely empirical, but it's important to study what's around us. But there's a stark realization and resentment when we begin to observe our universe. We aren't the center of everything. We just happen to be the one species thinking about it all. When we set our ego aside, what do we really have? A cold, empty universe, operating in mechanical meaninglessness. I'm not on board with a complete panpsychist view. Rocks don't have brains. And what a waste of consciousness that would be. We have superseded our survival through evolution with meaning beyond it. It's like our own intelligence encumbers us. I find it extremely ironic. Was it ever meant to be this way? And the answer is probably yes and no. We are the first vehicle, as far as we know, that was able to inspect and begin to understand its own parts, its own machinations. And inspecting the lesser vehicles helped us to understand that. We don't fully understand how the fuel, or consciousness in this case, interacts with the physical universe. We just keep chugging along, looking for a divine creator of the parts. We seek a source of this fuel. Imagine our disappointment when we realize it was all mechanical. I might find it relieving now. And if we live in a universe where the core principle is digital reality, I hope this simulation is a one-time thing. Anyway, that's enough for now. I think whether you see life as purely a natural process or something entirely synthesized, we can agree that there's a lot of waste going on. And I wouldn't want to create a universe this way in either fashion. I hope you guys have something to think about. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you later. Have a good night, and we'll see ya. Goodbye.